Hello, everybody, and it's time for another episode in our Meet the Clients series. And today I'm very excited to meet with somebody I've got to know recently, but who's running a very interesting initiative with, again, the potential to have a great impact on people throughout the world and especially in the global south. I'm talking about Frederic Hache, who lives in Belgium. And welcome to the show, Frederic.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about the initiative you run now and maybe trace its origins back to how it started, how it connects with your previous career?
Sure. My background is in financial markets. Nobody's perfect. So originally, I was an accidental investment banker, working on designing and selling derivatives in Paris and London.
Wow.
And I ended up there by chance, and it was what is called ordinary schizophrenia, right? I was on one hand selling these really toxic derivatives, but also reading Chomsky at home. And I guess I always wanted the public interest dimension in my work, which obviously was missing. Just like all of my colleagues at the time, I was acutely aware of having a very parasitic and socially detrimental professional activity. And so I tried to find other things for a long time. So I went through the whole, learning curve, I guess, from trying microfinance to so-called sustainable finance, blah, 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 and joining an NGO to work on financial market regulation. And what happened is that 7 years ago, I started working on green finance. And this whole new financialization of nature process, where you have carbon markets, but also these new markets on nature that are about to be created worldwide. And this seemed like a very interesting topic to investigate because it will have a tremendous impact on our common future, both on our ability to deal with the ecological crisis, but also in terms of social impact, because all these markets require a lot of land and they will typically go try to buy or steal land in the global south. So, and what happened is that the NGO for which I worked at the time told me that I could not write critically about it, otherwise I'll be censored, because writing critically could threaten our funding. So I quit and set up the Green Finance Observatory, which is a very small think tank whose mission is to analyze all the new financial market mechanisms linked to environmental policies in order to assess whether they can meet their environmental, social objectives or not. And so that's really what we do. We are trying to be the kind of expert independent voice, decrypting all these new financial instruments and financial markets, from the carbon markets, which are essentially markets trading permits to pollute, to the forthcoming biodiversity markets, which are permits to destroy nature. But you have also some other ones, such as markets to pollute rivers, etc., etc.
Okay, so at the beginning you said you suffered from this schizophrenia, but in a way it's thanks to that early career that you have the knowledge to do what you're doing right now.
Yes, absolutely. This comes in very handy today to know how markets function, how financial instruments function. That's very useful from a technical standpoint. And beyond that, to get a sense of the thinking behind it, or lack thereof. To understand, I mean, I come from a very competitive private sector, very mercenary attitude, where it's all about making a quick buck. And it's interesting also because, frequently when you deal with these issues, you encounter a lot of cynicism and partial ignorance. But it's very easy to caricature your adversaries. Whereas, when you get to know where they come from, etc., you get a more nuanced perspective, and I find that it helps to really identify the hurdles and the real blocking points, behind the superficial narratives.
And when you said that the purpose of the Green Finance Observatory is to decrypt, so to demystify, to explain, who are you explaining to?
To several audiences. First of all, I believe that it's very important to have an informed public debate about these issues because they will have a tremendous impact on our collective future. So I decrypt for the general public who wants to get informed about these two topics. Because I feel that independent analysis is a public good. So should people want to know about it, at least I'm trying to put the information out there in layman terms. And to be also up to date. I do a lot of regulatory monitoring. My base material is legislative proposals, whether at EU level, UN level, and increasingly also French and UK level, because these countries are leading the charge to financialize everything in life. But also work with MEPs, members of the European Parliament, elected officials, to help them understand these files and make amendment proposals to try to do some damage limitation, if you will. And then, as a third audience, I also work a lot with indigenous rights NGOs because they see on the ground the direct impact of these carbon offset projects and biodiversity projects, whereby very frequently you have local communities that are being evicted from their land and beaten up, tortured, or murdered as they try to come back. So I try to be the technical expert where they have the evidence on the ground. So that's kind of how we have complementary skill sets, if you will. And I try to do my very modest contribution on the technical side.
And what was behind the decision to set up this as a non-profit rather than as a financial consultant?
Well, the goal is not to be rich or to make money. For me, what happened at the time, I didn't want to set up anything, but there was no NGO working on these topics, really analyzing them. So I could not be hired by anyone, really. Or it would have been difficult. I mean, I had a very clear view of, maybe because of coming where I come from a financial angle of where this was heading and what were some issues. And some NGOs, to clarify, make a fantastic job on these issues, but more on the human rights angle.
Right.
But nobody was really working on analyzing the nuts and bolts of this market, And whereas I believe that the design of it, hidden behind the technical details, are really very real implication. And it was important to do this decrypting work. So the alternative for me would have been to work in academia to do that. But I thought that I don't want to write reports that end up in a shelf. And so I wanted to also be involved in trying to change things, the political process and provide assistance. So this is how I came up with the reluctant decision to set up this small NGO.
Okay, great. And in recent weeks, then we've been working with you on some of these texts that you've put together, specifically the script for a film to do the decrypting that you mentioned. Can you say something about how that collaboration came about and how it's worked out for you?
Yes, absolutely. So, well, the first years I worked a lot on the technical side, analyzing the legislative proposals, but it's pointless if no one hears about it. And very few people read technical reports, understandably so. So more recently, I've started working on a series of explainer videos targeted at lay people, but more specifically at indigenous people and local communities. Because as these markets are about to grow exponentially, then the pressure for indigenous people to sell their land rights or to sell their land will increase tremendously. And they're being increasingly pressured into doing so. And I felt it was very important for them to understand what are these markets, who is promoting them, for what purpose, what are the risks and benefits for them, and what questions maybe they want to ask themselves before agreeing to anything. So there are these videos, and together with some fantastic NGOs, we've developed a script for that. And then, obviously, we wanted to have the script translated into as many languages as possible. And this is where Peter, a fantastic friend of mine, mentioned your work and put me in contact with you. And it was an incredible collaboration because you managed to translate the script into a lot of languages. And not only that, but also to find incredibly generous volunteers who agreed to put their face on the movie. And this is really rare and precious. This is the kind of thing that makes a difference, and this is the kind of thing that gives me hope in humankind. This kind of things,
Yes.
because
In fact, that they've translated it, and then what they're doing is they're reading the script from their telephone while their
yeah,
telephone is recording them. So they're turning
yes.
into film stars in a small way at the same time.
But it is not only very kind, but it's also very brave of them, because it's easy to do that in Belgium. In some part of the world, it is more dangerous to do that, to put your face on it.
Right.
So I'm incredibly grateful, and I couldn't have done it without you guys. And it's really interesting. It gives me hope, because you can see that a few people with some specific skill set and dedication can potentially reach out to a large audience. And if, from my perspective, if we contribute to preventing one predatory project, that will already be a tremendous win.
That's a great note on which to end. So, like I always say to the volunteers that we work with, it's not a question of being an optimist or a pessimist, but being an activist. What you're doing is acting on the situation, trying to drive some change. And in a small way, we're able to help you do that through these different languages. So it's been great to work with you, hoping for many more collaborations in the future. And thank you for your time today.
No, thank you very much to you.